It is now 16 minutes to 4, and it's more of the living room, and this part is on the art of war. This program was first heard this morning from 10 a.m. to noon.
Hello, it's a brand new week, and we have a brand new topic this Monday, 9th September. And in our studio is Dr. FOO Teck. He is renowned for his research on the art of war. If you're not too familiar about the art of war, well, maybe the name Sun Tzu would ring some bells there. Well, author of 3 books, Reminiscences of an Ancient Strategist, The Mind of Sun Tzu. Dr. FOO is also author of Organizing Strategies into Business Warcraft, and also Thinking Around Stratagems. And in his book, The Mind of Sun Tzu, well, it has been recommended by the prestigious London-based World Review. Dr. FOO is also Associate Professor at the NTU, lecturing, I believe, in the School of Engineering. Hi, Dr. FOO.
Hi, Stanley.
How was your weekend?
Very good. Very well. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming down, and we're going to find out more about the mind of Sun Tzu and his art of war, the strategies that are actually, held therein, and how we can actually apply them to our lives. Now, a little bit of what I got from that background on Sun Tzu is that what he's written is one of those rare texts that have transcended over time. And though it was written more than 2,000 years ago, it is still the most important book on the subject of strategy today. It was written by this Chinese general to the state of Wu, and the art of war was initially intended only for the military elite of his time. However, this treatise would later be absorbed by others of influence, from the fearless samurai in feudal Japan to the shrewd business leader of the 21st century, and that's where we come into play. Now, let's find out more about the background of Sun Tzu's Art of War. I believe there are 13 chapters. Dr. FOO, you'd like to give us more of that background if you're not too familiar with his work?
Well, Sun Tzu written his book Art of War, and I believe that because of his long presence in history, 2,500 years, that even if you don't read Sun Tzu, you will find that some of his concepts and ideas were having embedded in practices, thinking of military organizations, partly because management in the West drew a lot from the military. For example, operation research and so on and so forth. So you find that, in fact, now the United States are very crazy or fanatic about Sun Tzu Art of War, especially after the Vietnam War. So you find that in movies like 13 Days, the president will mention about Sun Tzu. Right? So, Sun Tzu is something that you have to know. If you do not know, you cannot compete.
And that's why we have Dr. FOO with us. I have to admit I don't really know much myself, and therefore I'm going to learn all about Sun Tzu's Art of War right here with Dr. FOO. If you'd like to watch our guests in the studio, do drop by our website, newsradio.com.sg, click on Hear Us and See Us, and that's where you can catch a glimpse of our guests, giving us insight on the art of war. Now, Dr. FOO, how did you, become so engaged in researching Sun Tzu's work? It must have played an impact in your own life.
Oh yes, it did. And then, well, it came by chance actually. I mean, it's a long story, but I'll cut it short simply by telling you that my PhD, which was done at St. Andrews, was on corporate strategy of top Asian CEOs, and the public listed companies who have survived, who were responsible for the growth of the ASEAN region. And when I did my survey, when I did my writing up into thesis, and when I wrote into a book called Organizing Strategies, Sun Tzu Business Warcraft, what I found was that when I look at all the, my book was a tome, was a voluminous tome, it's about 600 pages. And my brother came along and said that, look, what you've written here is nothing. Nothing, really nothing. Why? I said, nothing, it's a PhD, I got a PhD, and, I'm just, converting to a book. Well, what insights you have got there in the 600 pages is summarized by one man who lived 2,500 years ago. And of course, just imagine you're in my position, I say, oh, rubbish, it's not possible, it's impossible. Well, my brother said, look, take your time, read these 13 chapters. I read them. And thereafter, the other co-author, there's a co-author to my book on strategy, Peter Grenier, and he was my supervisor at St. Andrews, and of course, he's very well known for his research on strategy. He too was very surprised when I told him, look, we should actually quote Sun Tzu, because in Asia, in Southeast Asia, the ASEAN companies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was no MBA. And the fact that without the MBA background, and these companies could emerge, it was really something that they had to have some concept to draw on. It couldn't be from MBA. And that's where Peter Grenier told me, look, have a look at the book, and he called me and said, look, yeah, right, check that. We must quote Sun Tzu. And in fact, you find that in the reorganizing strategy, all his main principles, his main concept, his main thinking are embedded in the statistical results. Meaning to say, very simply, that if you want to embed your mind to think strategically, there's nothing better than to take hold of out of war, copy out of war. And what I've done in SIM in this the sharpening class was to translate this out of war into cards, 158 cards, and the participants who have been through the course, a 2 days course, right? What they were required to do was embed quickly this and simply and easily and smoothly into the mind the thinking about the war, and thereafter apply it to real military situations. So we review world wars. We review, for example, Hitler conquest on Russia. We review the Japanese conquest on China, and we say, look, what are the principles of Sun Tzu that are... And inevitably, the participants were able to draw very incisive lessons on strategy by themselves. You know, I mean, I given the evaluation report to family there, and you could read it for you to hear.
I'm going to refer to it in a little while. You mentioned about those cards, 158 cards.
Yes.
What are those cards for?
Well, what I do is I look at Art of War and I just translate the ideas of Art of War into cards, easy learning cards, key critical ideas into modules. So they're the size of a name card, and therefore on each card are the main principles of Art of War.
Okay, and through those, the participants are meant to devise or get the strategies from those cards?
Yes, very quickly. And it was a very efficient way of embedding their mind with the concepts of Art of War. And thereafter, they apply those thinking to a war scenario, to a documentary. And they were able to draw lessons, and they felt that it was a very effective, efficient way of learning the art of war.
We're talking with Dr. FOO Teck, renowned for his research on the art of war. He's authored 3 books, Reminiscences of an Ancient Strategist, The Mind of Sun Tzu, Organizing Strategies, Sun Tzu's Business Warcraft, and Thinking Around Stratagems. Interestingly also, Dr. FOO is at the moment in the midst of conducting 3 workshops. Firstly, if you caught a word ago, he mentioned about the Sharpening class. It's all about internalizing the art of war strategy. That one, unfortunately, has ended, so you missed out on that one. There's one coming up. It's called the Deepening class, the Creative Art of War Strategist, and the final one, the final workshop at 2 days that he's going to be conducting those workshops in October. I believe it's the 31st of October and the 1st of November. That particular workshop is called the Mastering class. It's about applying art of war in crafting strategy. And those workshops are being conducted at SIM. And if you'd like to find out more information on those workshops, finding out more about Sun Tzu's art of war, call this number at 6248-9417, 6248-9417, or email exec@sim.edu.sg. Well, we're still talking about art of war with Dr. FOO Teck. If you have any questions or comments, if it has worked for you, those strategies, by all means, call us in the studio at 669-11938, fax in at 625-12938, or you can drop us an email at livingroom@mediacorpradio.com. Now, Dr. FOO, it contains 13 chapters, all in all, talking about Sun Tzu's art of war. What particular areas do each chapters actually, focus in? Is it all about really war strategy?
Oh, good. I mean, that's a very good question. And really, what Sun Tzu did was really to give a very wide spectrum. And his coverage is immersed. He would talk about, in his work about spies, the last chapter. He would talk about fire technology, fire-based technology. He would talk about grounds. And, in the Bangkok Post article, which I was invited to contribute, I mentioned about Michael Porter. And I said what Michael Porter does really in his competitive strategy was to tell you which ground to this sort of product to go into. But Sun Tzu is much broader. And one of the reasons why I think Sun Tzu is so broad is because when he writes this work, he's writing this work as a general fighting real war. And in an article in Marketing Insight, which drew a lot of attraction and attention, was the fact that Sun Tzu's art of war, from my perspective, was really what I call empirical science. He actually studied, he actually got involved, and then he wrote them down as, this is a lesson I can learn, all right, which is relevant to strategy. For example, all right, he will write about the eagle, how the eagle actually captured a rabbit. And from the eagle, he learns about timing. And he even observed, for example, you say the army, all right, the army should be should get a momentum in its charge. And where does he draw his lessons from? He draws his lessons from locks. He says locks that are square, they are round, and they roll on the mountain to get a momentum. Now, Newton draw the same analogy about momentum, And of course, you find that the most famous comment that Sun Tzu made was the fact that Sun Tzu mentioned about water. Be as flexible as water. And I think that is it's enormous contribution. It makes it simple. But the most important point I'd like to emphasize is that Sun Tzu's work must be read metaphorically, meaning to say that you should read his work not literally. But for example, he mentioned about general. General means, a CEO. When he mentioned about king means the chairman of a company. So you find that actually Sun Tzu is a highly observant person. And what I did after writing Organizing Strategy was really to write the other book, Reminiscences of Ancient Strategist. And what do you mean by Reminiscences? What I did was really to explore how did Sun Tzu came to write the book Art of War. Because there are no other book like it in the world. No other book. Nobody code. Nobody is so scientific and so empirical. You're not talking about work done today. You're talking about work done 2,500 years ago. And from that, I found that really there is a lot there that we can learn from other work, especially not apply other work per se, relationally, but really to ask yourself, can I think like Sun Tzu? Can I adopt his mind, his thinking processes? So in deepening class, what I hope to do, which is a contrast or sharpening class, is to deepen the mind of the participants. So I developed, for example, teaching you how to think relationally, which Sun Tzu did. Teach how to think visually, imaginatively, how to think semi-consciously, how to think ethically, how to think empathically, how to think even mystically, how to think scenario-wise, how to think symbolically, how to think inventively, and also taxonomically. And that's not the end, right? But definitely you find that Sun Tzu's mind is a deep mind. And part of the reason I discovered why his mind was so deep was because he drew 2,500 years ago from the teaching of Tao. I think Taoism is a very important philosophy. Don't forget, acupuncture all came from Tao. And one thing you will learn from Tao is that some of its basic thinking it can be traced to Taoism. Yes, thank you, Stanley.
Now, you think metaphorically, and that's how you actually relate all these war strategies into current day, modern day business practice.
Yes.
So that is how it's actually drawn parallel to war and business.
Yes.
But it's really business all about really competing that vigorously and having to outperform, and I won't say there's any undercutting in the strategies. I don't assume there is. Yeah. So that kind of thinking beyond what your enemy thinks.
Well, I think what Sun Tzu really tell you is number one is that the world we live in today, is highly competitive. It's hyper competitive. I mean, you look, it's a survival of the fittest. I mean, you look at the US. In the US, the basic thing you need to learn is Darwinian theory of survival of the fittest. And also it is, the other thing I think is very true of US competition really is that the winner takes all. So under the sort of environment, I think you have to be competitive. You have. And yet at the same time, you must not lose your health, for example. You must still maintain a cool, strategic response to changing events. The world is in a state of transition. Major transition.
Even more now, so.
Yes, even now more so than the mass production era of the early 20th century. Now you find that your knowledge, your technology, your skills, for example, is going to be AI away. Right? So you could always be thinking, the whole industry could be wiped away. Right? So if you don't think deeply and ask yourself fundamental questions, then you are in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a little later in the program, in the next part, we'll get a little bit more insight on that deepening class on how we can actually think more relatively, think visually, think semi-consciously. Wow, that's interesting. So probably we'll find that out from Dr. FOO, Teck, our guest in the studio right now. Meanwhile, we're going for a news break, and if you have any questions or comments during that time, do give us a call in the studio at 669-11938. Or you'd like to fax us at 625-12938. Stay tuned, it's News Radio 938. We're talking about understanding that mind of Sun Tzu, if we can only just a little bit at least. Sun Tzu's Art of War strategies are contained therein and how you can apply them in life. In our studio this morning is Dr. FOO Teck, renowned for his research on the art of war. He has authored 3 books: Reminiscences of an Ancient Strategist, The Mind of Sun Tzu, Organizing Strategy, Sun Tzu Business Warcraft, and also Thinking Around Stratagems. And Dr. FOO is with us to tell us more about also some of his workshops that are taking place, 3 of them actually. And this is the Art of War series taking place at the SIM. And we'll give you details on where you can find out more about those workshops and perhaps even register if you like in the later part of the program. Now, Dr. FOO, earlier you were talking about how we should, have that sort of theory on how to understand the mind of Sun Tzu. You mentioned about trying to think relatively visually, semi-consciously, symbolically, among others.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just tantalize interest a little bit here on what does it mean to actually think these ways?
Oh, well, firstly, it came to me when I, having written Organized Strategy and having spent time thinking deeply, how did Sun Tzu come about with writing this Art of War, considering the fact that it was written 2,500 years ago. And it's from all this work that I produced about 80 over conceptualizations and their illustrations, but they're surreal work, yeah? They are surrealism work, and really this images would help a person when he reads the book, Reminiscences of Ancient Strategist, to go deeply into the writing of Sun Tzu. It would facilitate him to ask deep questions. For example, one of the diagram that I developed in Reminiscences of Ancient Strategies was based on this BCG model, which is, of course, those who are familiar with BCG, Boston Consulting Group, right? They have this product matrix, and when I use this illustrations to test on perceptions of the participants, most of them couldn't figure it out, right? So, and of course, you'll find that one of the key thing is for me to see whether, right, can you think deeply, and I would tell you that for certain, you would find that the illustrations will be baffling for some. Some you may say, well, it's too straightforward, but through the course you will learn, and it will take you some time, and there'll be post-workshop work for you to do, for you to look at that, and then to spend your time to think deeply. Now, one of the key things you must realize is that the unconscious communicate with you. The unconscious communicate with you not through words. It communicates to you through symbols, through images. And in my lectures, I used to give the benzene as an example, the discovery of benzene, how the snake chasing the tail emerged, to collude when he was, sitting before the fire. And that gave him the idea of the structure of the molecule for benzene. In the same way, Newton was sitting on the apple tree, and the apple fell, and he saw the moon up there still hanging. And that gave him, the insight. And that is what I'm trying to engender in readers who read the book Art of War, to come up with strategy that are superior, that emerge from deep thinking. I believe, number one, that with the internet, and with all this competition, that you're not going to win by simply following another's bloody instruction. Nobody can really have you shape your strategy. So this is the basic paradigm that I'm working on.
But how do we actually know for sure that we're not either adding on to Sun Tzu's thoughts, or how do we know we're not misinterpreting or having our own version of what he may be thinking?
No, the main key point, and that's where we come to the next part of the course, called the mastering class. But ultimately, I am a firm believer that Sun Tzu himself will be very disappointed if you were to tell you, I formulated the strategy based on Art of War, he would probably tell you that was written 2,500 years ago. Have you not considered all the changes, all the developments and all those? Have you not been using your mind? Therefore, I create the mastering class in order to tell participants, look, now you got to a sense of how Sun Tzu thinks, of the depth of his mind. Now, the grand finale must be that you are able to create your own Art of War. For example, like Musashi. Musashi written a Book of Five Rings, and you can see in the Book of Five Rings the traces of Sun Tzu. And of course, Mao Zedong, for example, right? Mao Zedong is a master strategist, and he himself was very. He did not claim that he read Sun Tzu, but when he saw Sun Tzu Art of War, he said, "Look, it's like my strategy." Right. So finally, I believe that you must, in order, to master strategy, you must be able to craft your own Art of War, your own writing on Art of War, and which I hope to facilitate. And then every workshop you attend, every new idea that emerges from now to the future, you then extract what is relevant to refine your own Art of War.
Now, Dr. Fu, you have been doing so much research into Art of War. How extensive and how exhaustive would you say, developing Art of War has been for you?
I think I'll be honest with you, Stanley. I don't think there's ever an end to learning. Right? My new book coming out is on Imperial Mind. So what I did was I actually try and study the mind of... you see, I believe strategy is a female's art. It's feminine art. in the old days at least, since because if you are a good fighter, you don't have to depend on strategy, you don't have to use strategy,
So it's just a physical force, brute force.
Yes, because you are strong and powerful, you are weak, and therefore you have to use strategy. And of course, what I did in study Imperial Mind, why did I study Imperial Mind? I wrote Imperial Mind because I actually try and put myself in the shoes of Wu Zetian, Empress Wu. And she was inducted into the palace as a maid, palace maid. And as the bottom rung, and she rose higher than emperor. She was actually the divine emperor. Right? She actually came up with her own dynasty. For women to do that in China, in the 700th century, it is something rather impossible. That's why I study, that's why I analyze it, and that's why I review all this in my next coming book, Imperial Mind. So it's an endless process, to study and I keep on reading, I keep on researching, I keep on exploring in the same way, that anybody who competes in the real world will have to do that. Because the world keep on changing, you've got to keep on adapting, even for me as an author.
We're talking with Dr. FOO Teck. He's authored 3 books. The titles are Reminiscences of an Ancient Strategist, The Mind of Sun Tzu, Organizing Strategy as well, Sun Tzu Business Warcraft, and Thinking Around Stratagems. Maybe just briefly give us a little bit of a synopsis on what the 3 books actually address. I'm sure they have different themes. Maybe.
Yeah, sure. They're very different. In fact, well, first of all, I would start with the recent one, Thinking Around Stratagem. Thinking Around Stratagem is to bring the Chinese secret out of war. Now, the 36 one is very important because it has become, in China, a social way of, it has been socialized into the system. So that the Chinese will say, okay, like a Reminiscences. All the Chinese will know what is Reminiscences. But if you are new to China, you don't know that there's such a thing as Reminiscences. You'll be severely disadvantaged.
And what is Reminiscences?
Kong is another strategy, so thinking about strategy, try and communicate this to the reader in simple way, using very simple diagram, what the essence of the stratagem is about.
Sorry, those
yes.
the 2 T's you just mentioned.
Yes.
Could you give us a little bit of an insight, especially for those of us who aren't as knowledgeable? Yeah.
Reminiscences is using women. When you go to Taiwan to do business, you find that the first thing they do about to sign a contract the night before is to bring it to a function in the club and to drink, and they'll soften you all up, so that, of course, Reminiscences, is used, I won't mention name, but, by tyrants, for example, they'll use female spies, they will, belly dancers who will try and tease you, and that's how they get rid of people who oppose the regime, right? They use sexy belly dancers, to entice you and get rid of you.
Sounds like some James Bond movie.
Well, it is, but it's very harsh. But I hope by creating this work, really to make it in a very simple way. So Thinking Around Stratagem is intended for an audience so that when they go to business in China, they say, okay, look, this article, they say, I got to be aware of it. I'm not really telling you to use it. I'm telling you to be aware that you're not a victim of one of the 36 stratagems. Then, of course, Reminiscences of Ancient Strategist is a tool, right, to really help you deepen your mind of strategy, to deepen your thinking. Right, because the Chinese believe, right, that to master anything, 静 is important. 要静下来，想一想. And that is allowing your unconscious, your subconscious mind to work on it. For example, when you do business, right, I explain to you, let's say, for instance, you're a businessman, you have to go to industry shows. You must see what the competitors are doing, and you got to talk to customers, you have to talk to board directors, the bankers. All these are images. But you must give yourself time to let all these images sink into your subconscious. And let your subconscious tell you, this is what you must do. Now, don't ever think that new ideas are always better ideas. Some of the old ideas, very ancient ideas, are still relevant in modern world. For example, the latest, of course, in production technology is really to have what you call mass customization. And what is mass customization? Mass customization is to develop an AI tool, a tool whereby the customers can choose and select and design their own watches, right? Mass customization. But if you were to study, read Top 13, old Chinese book on ancient thinking, it will tell you, right, the strategy you must do is by seeing wei xin, by seeing wei xin, meaning to say your mind should be the customer's mind, because the customer is by seeing for you. Right, so finally on this organized strategy, which is really my PhD work, is actually written very useful for those who wants to know, okay, how does Sun Tzu relate to modern business? If I run a big company, okay, how is it relevant? How is it been proven that it was in big companies? That book is for you.
We're talking with Dr. FOO Teck, and he is authored, just given some insight on the 3 books that he has written: Reminiscences of an Ancient Strategist, The Mind of Sun Tzu, Organizing Strategy, Sun Tzu Business Warcraft, and Thinking Around Stratagems. Give us some maybe examples of maybe how some companies maybe, or some company leaders, business leaders have actually, embraced Sun Tzu's Art of War, and all the concepts and theories therein.
Well, I think the most important point to realize is that it has seeped into the mind of business leaders already. So it's not something new, like benchmarking that So most of the businessmen would have applied that. Ask us a very simple question: how do the Southeast Asian Chinese? I read an article in Bangkok Post, for example, that where do they learn to manage? And most of them have sometimes no education at all. Where to get the basic framework? It must be from Art of War. And because of that, it must be from all this sort of thinking that is what I call oral tradition, that they had a mental framework to manage, right? In fact, it makes a lot of sense because you look at most MBA courses. Most MBA courses use corporate strategy as a capstone course, meaning to say after you learn all the multi-disciplines, then we close it up with a corporate strategy. Right? And I believe strategy is a lifelong thing. It's not something where you attend a course, you learn the technique, you apply the technique, because the technique itself can be outmoded by changes in the environment. And one of the basic fundamental change in the environment really is that Internet is going to bring about a massive transition in the world economy. How is that so? So MBA is grounded on big companies. Don't forget that. The Harvard Business School and its case studies are all usually large companies. Right, and you find that the idea of employing somebody for a job for lifelong is going to go away with the Internet, right? And most of us will end up having to be, right, what you call independent supplier, and it will be reversed. Instead of a big company employing a lot of people, you yourself having to find a lot of other employers to work for, right? So under this sort of environment, Art of War will still be relevant, but the most important thing really is to think through it deeply. Now, how in this situation am I going to apply my strategy? What should my strategy be? That is why I believe I use Art of War as a framework, as a mental framework to engage your mind in strategic thinking. Thereafter, I will go upon the deepening class and make you think through. Then mastering class to encourage you to write out your own Art of War. Because the world keeps on changing. My own Art of War is also changing. So it must be for you too, I'm sure.
So in other words, strategies cannot, they're not, are they a lifelong thing? I mean, since the environment around us changes all the time, so when we have a strategy, is it going to take us through the first 5 years, first 10 years, or, it's a long-term strategy?
Well, I think any strategy that you configure will have to be adapted the moment the environment changes.
So it cannot be hard and fast, fixed.
Oh, it cannot be. Impossible. Look at water. That's why Sun Tzu metaphor is so beautiful. You put water into any container. It assumes the shape of that container. This is the best lesson you can have on strategy. Number 2, Sun Tzu is also marvelous for number 1, that he doesn't think like an average 4-star general. He thinks beyond a 4-star general. A 4-star general will say, like, let's hammer them up. Let's bring in a howitzer. Let's bring in our latest, spy plane or whatever it is, and bomb them, flat. But Sun Tzu goes one step further. Sun Tzu said that is not a good general. A good general is one who win war without fighting. That means to say you actually have productivity without input, and that's the maximum productivity you can get. Right? So Sun Tzu is deeper, go beyond just military. His Art of War has a deep thinking around it, has a deep philosophy about it. And that marks Art of War out from all other types of strategy.
Dr. FOO Teck is with us in the studio. If you have any questions or comments, our number is 669-11938. You're tuned to the living room with me, Stanley Leong. And, besides business applications that we've really been talking about quite a bit, Art of War has also been shown to be relevant even in such recreational sports as maybe winning in golf. Well, that we'll be finding out more from Dr. FOO in the next part of the living room. Do stay with us. We're talking about understanding the mind of Sun Tzu's Art of War, the strategies contained inside, and also how they can be used to be applied in your own life. Stay tuned. It's News Radio 938, and very shortly the news coming up. of you tuned in, do give us a call in the studio, 669-11938. Well, Serene, we might as well put your question right now to Dr. Fu. Now, Serene has asked how strategies have evolved from when The Art of War was first written till today.
Well, a very good question, Serene. Thank you for raising the question. Really, when Art of War was written 2,500 years ago, it was really not, like in today where they will make money from books and they will publish it, they would, mass market it. When Art of War was written, I think it was more like a gift. It was more like a treasure. It was more like, Chinese value knowledge way above money, and that's very important. Today era, I think, our value system has changed dramatically. Now, the Art of War, its relevance can be seen, number one, I think, in terms of helping, for example. I'm a firm believer that Genghis Khan knew of the Art of War. Now, one very interesting about Genghis Khan, of course, is that he actually does not read and write, right? And yet, his empire was the largest land empire in human history. But you can see from biography, for example, that some of the records that he mentioned, for example, they are actually from the Art of War. Like timing, he mentioned about the eagle, exactly the same as what Sun Tzu mentioned. So over time, you will find that, that this Art of War, the thinking, the concepts may have percolated throughout the society through unauthorized copies of Art of War. They will copy on bamboo strips, and you will filter through different. In fact, you find that in the Tang Dynasty, the Tang Emperor, also Li Si, I think, who was the founder of the Tang Dynasty, who actually gave, who made a person a prime minister because this guy gave him 36 stratagems to help him to rule in imperial court. So this Art of War thing in ancient China, is actually something very, very much like a treasure. It's not some book that you buy for $10, $50 or $15 or $30 today. Right, so of course you find that the Western side, they did not really know of the Art of War. In fact, you find that most of the Second World War, that's why I was very, very keen to get my participants to actually look at Second World War conflicts and see and evaluate the winner and the loser. And inevitably you will find the winner is the one that adhered to the principles of the Art of War in Sun Tzu. And of course you find there's after the Vietnam War, as I mentioned to you, that, that Americans start to be crazy about Sun Tzu, that when it comes to Desert Storm, every American was carrying one copy of Sun Tzu. That, I think, is overdoing it a little. But I return here to the question that Stanley raised earlier about how Art of War be applicable to golf, for example. Now, that is in mind, right? You only start to think about strategy when you want to win. Very important. It's an exclusive group. Right? It'll not be useful for you really when you do start out. It's better that you look at the manuals and how to do your strokes properly in golf. But it becomes very relevant in all sports, not only golf. The moment when your techniques have been perfected, when it comes to the mind. You see, the mind of Sun Tzu is very important. The Sun Tzu tells you now how to win effortlessly. That you must try and win with minimum strokes. Now, my theory, of course, is that Sun Tzu have probably read I know about the teaching of Taoism, about Tao Te Ching. But Tao Te Ching mentions that a great tailor is someone, in Chinese, 大刺不刻, meaning to say that great tailor doesn't cut a lot. He uses minimum stroke. It's the same with golf, right? It's the same with any sports. That when you reach the competition at the mind level, and for that I would recommend you to read Musashi. You see, we Chinese know a lot about the war, but we never bothered to study Musashi. Musashi is written a book called the Gorinosha, which you must study carefully because it tells you how, as a single warrior, how to train your mind to win, right? In other words, you read Gorinosha carefully. He'll tell you that even without the swords, all right, your body is actually an instrument, right? So Musashi deals a lot with the mind. Also, if you read carefully Gorinosha, it could be beyond just the technique; it's the mind. And again, of course, Art of War, I will not be surprised if it will be used, right, for the future football games, for example. Now you got Japan and Korea into it now. A lot of American football coaches have this. You go to the internet, you'll find they'll say they use Sun Tzu for coaching. So in football, you will find that inevitably this would filter through. So, well, I tried to answer Serene, your question together with using Sandy Leong, and you see now how this art of war has changed over time. And I believe strategy is forever changing.
You're quite interested when you mentioned football there, such as how would a team actually be able to use Sun Tzu's concepts and theories to actually win a soccer game?
Well, football is a team game, so it has greater relevance, right, than, let's say, in a golf situation. Right, so when you talk of football, in fact, football would be the best arena to test strategy. Why? Because, in business, it's very hard to say who is better, who is not better, because, one has more resources, one has less resources, and American companies got all the technology, and your Asian company don't have technology, and once you have technology, you are superior, or on superior ground. So football is a nice scenario. Why? Because you got 11 men. They cannot take drugs. They have to play physical raw strength. So the question, how you deploy, how you use strategy now, in terms of flexibility, in terms of, for example, in the old days when football first came about, you have the back, you had those people playing center forward, left winger, right winger, that fixed role position. Now what Sun Tzu tells you really is that you must be flexible. How to be flexible? Flexible means that every one of the footballer must be able to play in different positions, in fully adapting to the arena of depending on the situation, how the game evolves and develops. So I believe that Sun Tzu would be applicable. And of course it tells you about the captain, right, how to be a captain, the leadership, the roles of a leader, and so on and so forth, strategy of tactics of resources, and so on and so forth. So it would be applicable.
We're not talking about World Cup strategies for the next World Cup here. We're talking about understanding the mind of Sun Tzu right here on the living room. And our guest is Dr. FOO Teck, and he's written already 3 books all about the Art of War series. And the title of those books are Reminiscences of an Ancient Strategist, The Mind of Sun Tzu, as well as Organizing Strategy, Sun Tzu Business Warcraft, and also Thinking Around Stratagems. And he's with us right now telling us more about understanding that particular mind of Sun Tzu. Let's move on to this article I have here in my hands. It's written by Mr. Mike Johnston, International Chairman for the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Here's what he had to say. I was drawn to an article by Dr. FOO. The title was Sun Tzu, Creativity and Innovation. And Mr. Johnston says, I'm sure there are few people in business who haven't heard of Sun Tzu, soldier and strategist who lives in ancient China. There must be even fewer in marketing who haven't been exposed to writings or lectures on what Sun Tzu can offer marketing strategy. And he said he had read the article with skepticism as well as interest, but by the time he had finished, all sorts of lights were going on. And Mr. Johnson said that his preconceived ideas had been a blindfold to seeing another and more important aspect of Sun Tzu. Now, this blindfold that Mr. Johnston has raised, what sort of blindfold is this talking about?
Well, I think most people approach Art of War from a very static perspective, not from a dynamic perspective. You do not see Art of War as a creative work. It's really a creative work because if you study Sun Tzu in original Chinese, right, they are really not written as an essay or as an article as we do today. They're actually snatches of insights, what I call the aha. Sun Tzu observe the environment and say, this is it. And he learns from nature. His method is what I call empirical science, if I can borrow that term. So that you find that most of what he says remains 2,500 years ago, written 200 is still valid today. Most of the key concepts. And of course, when Mike Johnson referred to blindfold, I'm quite certain that he must have referred to the fact that he doesn't see Art of War as being relevant to innovation and creativity. Now, Sun Tzu actually make it very clear in his Art of War. He says that if you are a good general, right, you must be limitless in terms of creating new strategy. And he said, you look at music. Music, there are 5 notes, right? In China, Chinese music is 5 notes. And yet you see the number of melodies that can be created out of just 5 notes. So what Sun Tzu is trying to get is don't ever repeat a strategy. Don't ever become predictable. Meaning to say that if I know that you are a Sun Tzu fan and you are actually an addict to Sun Tzu and you cannot think outside Sun Tzu, then what Sun Tzu will be saying that you are a failure. Why are you a failure? Because he tells you that you should not always, the key concept is be unpredictable. Surprise is a key element. And of course, this, if you trace the origin, I've done textual research and I found that it's actually mentioned in Tao Te Ching too, that when you use a soldier, you must qi yong bing, meaning to say the extraordinary way of using soldiers. extraordinary of using workers. Like what they're doing now, that in the past, when you employ workers, what do you do? Your production workers, you just employ, the production work. But the Japanese came along and said, look, we should use the brain, your QCC. Now Ford Motors have gone one step further and said, we give all the workers a computer at home, so they access knowledge. So this is where, if you wrap this thing, right, the key to winning is 其用定. You must be limitless in terms of your creativity and in terms of your ideas. Now, what I'm telling you is that your mind is 10% conscious, 90% unconscious. So, if you hope to find it by reading some manual, and that is a futile effort. Right? The best thing for you to do really is get all the data, get all the images, get all the feedback, get all the thinking done, reading done. Then afterwards, right, as I emphasize in my course on deepening thoughts, right, you really got to let your unconscious work on it. Let the unconscious communicate to you and tell you, right, this is what you should do. This is the strategy for this situation. And on top of that, in my mastering class, which I will emphasize, is that you then have to come up with your own art of war. Because, like Sun Tzu derives art of war from his empirical observations of the environment, the situation, and he drew the lessons. In the same way, you should follow Sun Tzu by doing the same observation, and yet not be bounded by the text, but think outside of the text, and create your own art of war, a strategy that will help you compete. And one reason why I told most of my participants why Sun Tzu is so brief, 5,000 words only, right, is simply because that was intended, and yet it's so broad. It's 5,000 words, a single topic, it's pretty long, but it's so broad, right? It's very simple that he has to fight a war, and if he has to fight a war, right, he has to be quick about what to do, and you find the other war is very useful. And I tested it out in the sharpening class, that if you have all these ideas and ready, you find that you can quickly see where you can win, why you lose. It's a sharp picture, a sharp focused picture of how to win that emerge from your understanding deeply of the art of war.
The mastering class, Applying Art of War in Crafting Strategy, is happening on the 31st of October and the 1st of November at the SIM. And if you'd like to find out more information on that particular course, this is the number to call, 6248-9417. Once again, that number is 6248-9417. Or you can email to this address. It's exec@sim.edu.sg. Meanwhile, if you've got any questions or comments right now, and we don't really have much time left, give us a call in the studio at 669-11938. Now, Dr. Fu, earlier also during the break, we're talking about the womanization of the business world, and that was rather interesting, and how we brought up Emperor Wu as well. And tell us, sorry? Yes, tell us more about this womanization bit. Is it still relevant to especially modern day, and how women these days actually take the view of that emperor? And you even mentioned Cleopatra as an example.
Well, I was just wanted to, during the break I had a chat with Stanley, and what I mentioned was that, AI, artificial intelligence, with all this, internet availability, where with the computer taking away all the logical side of thinking, right, that I think the stage has been set for a greater role for the women, feminine folks in the future. Right, I always believe that the world, right, is in constant transition. So, you look at the internet has all the information you need in the future. Number two, all the logical thinking has been programmed away. There's some software that helps you solve the logical thinking part. What is missing? The computer cannot do for you that women are very good in doing. Women are very strong in intuitive thinking. They know intuition. They know what will work. Right, I mentioned Cleopatra, for example. Cleopatra is a classic example of the 36 stratagem. One which, you use when you're desperate. I'm not advocating for you to use it. But Egypt was facing the Roman Empire, during Cleopatra time. And, she's fascinating. Why? Because she could formulate a strategy to get Julius Caesar, right? And then Antony, two greatest Roman generals in history, to bow before her as a goddess in Egypt. Right. That is why I said that, a man would probably have not been able to come up with such a strategy, of course, because he's man.
You're listening to News Radio 938, a station of Media Corp Radio.